What if I told you the Spartans weren't just tough warriors, but a society built on slavery, fear, and a diet of blood soup? Intrigued yet? Let's talk history while watching completely unrelated footage, just because I don't know how to edit a video. But don't worry, I promise you'll understand history like never before, or maybe even like it. Probably. All right, buckle up. Ever wonder what happens when a society gets so obsessed with looking tough and fighting wars that they forget the whole being human part? Welcome to Sparta, where warrior culture wasn't a phase, it was life. Forget Netflix and chill. These guys were too busy chilling in armor and training to kill. Sound fun? Not so fast. The Spartans weren't just a bunch of muscle-bound action heroes running around in gloriously tight tunics posing on statues. Nope, they lived and breathed a code, one so rigid it made your average military dictatorship look like a puppy parade. But here's the kicker. This perfect warrior society was built on brutal oppression. And no, we're not talking about some shady behind-the-scenes backroom deals. Oh no. We're talking about slavery, state control, and a diet of black broth, which, if you're curious, is pork, blood, salt, and vinegar. Yummy, right? Yeah, no. And guess what? The worst part of it is their legacy still lingers today, like a bad hangover that never quite goes away. Authoritarian regimes, power-hungry leaders, and even corporate overlords, all still drooling over Spartan-style control. But before we get to the fallout, let's rewind and dive into how it all started. All right, grab a seat and imagine this. It's the 8th century BCE, and you're in the dusty hills of southern Greece. You've got two choices. Live in one of those cozy, thriving city-states like Athens, where people do things like think, debate, and invent democracy, or you can roll the dice and settle in Sparta, where the motto is basically, get hard or get out. Sparta wasn't about artsy philosophers or intellectual salons. Oh no, it was a hard, cold, military machine that looked like it was designed by a particularly sadistic drill sergeant. Let's meet the man who made it all happen, Lycurgus, the original Spartan dad. Imagine the most intense, overbearing father figure you can think of, like the love child of Mr. Miyagi and Darth Vader. This guy walked in, looked at the place, and said, "Right, we're turning this entire society into an army. You'll thank me later." Now, Lycurgus didn't mess about. The whole point of Sparta wasn't just to have a few soldiers to fight the occasional war. It was to create a superhuman fighting force. From day one, kids were literally bred to be warriors. Enter the agoge, Sparta's infamous military training system. This was no summer camp. We're talking about toughening kids up by the age of 7. Yep, you heard me, 7. By making them live in barracks, train like machines, and suffer through enough pain to make a modern-day boot camp look like a day at the spa. If they cried, they were weak. If they whined, they were out. Oh, and don't forget, your best mate might literally try to kill you just to see if you've got the grit to survive. Friendships? More like survival alliances. The crazy part? This wasn't a one-off thing. Nope. It was their entire way of life. Forget playing with toys or reading a book. These kids learned how to kill, survive, and obey. How's that for a childhood? And who was running the show? Two kings. Yep, Tup-you. Sparta had this weirdly unique political system where they had two royal families, because one king wasn't enough, apparently. These two kings were meant to balance each other out, sort of like an early version of a reality TV rivalry. But here's the kicker. While the kings got to lead the army and maybe throw a few parties, the real power was in the hands of the Gerousia, the Council of Elders. These old geezers were the ones who really called the shots. Imagine a group of grumpy grandpas, but instead of handing out Werther's originals, they're running an empire on fear, discipline, and totalitarian control. Everything in Spartan society was built around one thing: war. Period. Everything else, family, property, even the gods, took a back seat to creating the ultimate fighting force. The more hardcore you were, the more worthwhile you were as a Spartan. Everything was a test. Can you fight? No? Well then, get in the back of the line. And if you were unlucky enough to be born on the wrong side of the social ladder, the whole thing was even worse. Meet the helots, the enslaved population of Spartan society. Their job? Do everything for the Spartans, who lived the good life of endless training and occasional war. What was the catch? Oh, only that the helots vastly outnumbered the Spartans. No big deal, right? Spoiler, it was a big deal, but more on that later. But here's where things start to get dangerous. When you build an entire society on fear, discipline, and oppression, cracks tend to form, and they don't stay small for long. Remember the good old days when Sparta was just all about discipline, glory, and killing? Yeah, well, it turns out when you build your entire society on fear, absolute control, and slavery, things start to get a little unstable, like a well-oiled machine with a few tiny cracks. Let's dig into that, shall we? So what's the first rule of building a perfect society? Make sure the backbone of it doesn't completely outnumber the people in charge. Enter the helots. They were the backbone of Sparta, working the land, providing all the food, doing all the grunt work, while the Spartans spent their days training to be human killing machines. The problem? The helots vastly outnumbered the Spartans. So yeah, imagine a situation where the slaves have the numbers, but the warriors have the power and the weapons. Can you smell the disaster on the horizon? And let me tell you, disaster was coming. In fact, it came in the form of a little thing called the Helot Rebellion. Now, you'd think if your entire society was built on the backs of people who literally hate you, you might give them a little more freedom or kindness. But nope, Sparta decided to respond by making life even worse for them, brutalizing, exploiting, and enslaving them to the point where the Helots finally said, "Right, that's enough. We're having a revolt." And it was a big revolt, so much so that it nearly brought Sparta to its knees. Now, let's pause for a second. The Spartans? Oh, they were tough, no question. But when the Helots rose up in mass, suddenly the mighty warriors were looking a bit, well, human. And not in a good way. The Spartans needed to crush the rebellion fast. They were on the verge of losing everything. So, what did they do? They took drastic measures, sending young warriors out to kill off as many Helots as they could. You know, just in case one of them was plotting to do something crazy like overthrow the whole system. It was brutal. A massacre, and not just any massacre, one of institutionalized terror. They would even force Spartans to murder innocent Helots just to prove they were tough enough to keep the rebellion at bay. Nice, right? But here's the kicker. This is where things start to fall apart. You see, once you live by the sword, eventually, you die by it. The Spartan code, designed to maintain perfect control, had one fatal flaw. The more you oppress, the more rebellion you breed. And the more you kill in order to maintain control, the more paranoid you become. The Spartans were literally terrorizing their own society in order to preserve the status quo, but it only made them more unstable. It was like being stuck in a never-ending cycle of violence and fear. And guess what? Fear doesn't hold up well in the long run. But wait, there's more. The Spartans were also facing external threats because, as if internal strife wasn't enough, the Persians were looming nearby, ready to sweep in and crush everyone in their path. Sparta had spent so much time focusing on keeping the Helots in check that they almost forgot about the Persians. Classic case of not noticing the elephant in the room, eh? That's when the Spartans decided to, quite literally, throw themselves into the fire. The Persian Empire was massive, and it was hungry. Sparta, all too aware of its internal chaos, needed a victory, a massive one. So the Spartan kings made a bold choice. They sent their most elite warriors, the 300, to stand against a Persian force that outnumbered them by thousands. Yeah, no biggie. I mean, if you're going to fall on your sword, might as well do it with style, right? But here's the thing. These warriors weren't just facing a massive military force. They were also fighting the system they'd built, one that rewarded fear, brutality, and oppression. The 300 didn't just die defending Sparta from the Persians. They died defending a society teetering on the edge of collapse. And the thing about Sparta? They thought their toughness was the answer to everything. But in the end, all their brutal methods, tightening the noose on the Helots, slaughtering the weak, stifling dissent, only accelerated their downfall. Nice going, guys. And that's the irony of it all. The Spartan code was meant to be the ultimate strength, right? But it was also the very thing that destroyed them. The tighter they held on to control, the more they cracked. The more they lived by their brutal, fear-based code, the more they lost their grip. Sound familiar? It should, because we're still dealing with it. Here's the part nobody teaches you in school. You think you've just been learning about a bunch of nut jobs with spears and funny helmets, right? But buckle up, Because the Spartans, they didn't just vanish in a puff of smoke after their epic last stand at Thermopylae. Oh no, their legacy is still very much alive. And it's not all glory and 300 movie trailers. Spoiler alert, they were a perfect model of a militarized state gone wrong. And guess what? We're still living with the aftermath. Take a moment and think about the world we live in. Ever hear about the rise of authoritarian regimes? How about military dictatorships? Does the word North Korea ring a bell? Oh, it's ringing loud now, isn't it? That's right, Sparta, with its obsession with control, obedience, and brutal efficiency, laid the groundwork for modern-day regimes that love to turn their own citizens into subjugated, fearful drones. The idea that militarized control is good for society? Yeah, that started with the Spartans. And I'm not just talking about Kim Jong-un's dictator-chic wardrobe. Look at any modern power structure that idolizes military might, whether it's the likes of Putin's Russia or the military junta in Myanmar. Same flavor of Spartan masculinity. It's all about brute force, no questions asked. These regimes thrive on militarism, discipline, and fear, and they push the narrative that any sign of weakness is unacceptable. Sound familiar? It should, because it's basically Sparta 2.0, but with a slightly better PR team. Same obsession with strength, control, and making sure no one questions the system, except now it's global. You see, the Spartan Code wasn't just about warriors strutting around in armor. It was about creating a society that ran on fear, discipline, and complete subjugation. They used their slaves, the helots, just like how modern-day authoritarian states exploit their own citizens, often stripping them of rights, dignity, and any hope of upward mobility. In fact, the helots were so crucial to Spartan life, they could be disappeared at the drop of a hat, used as scapegoats for every little problem. And today, we still see this in authoritarian states where the working class is treated as expendable labor, like pawns in a never-ending game of chess. Sure, you can point at the Spartan virtues of hard work and discipline, but hey, there's a fine line between loyalty and exploitation. And guess what? Sparta crossed that line years ago. Now, let's talk militarism. Ever hear that annoying corporate buzzword efficiency? In Sparta, efficiency wasn't just about making better use of resources. It was about making sure every citizen, every slave, every single soul, even the kids, were working toward one goal: military dominance. And you know what? The same thing is still happening today in countless militarized societies. Every time some government or military entity says, "for the good of the people," it's basically code for, "we want to control every aspect of your life." It's the same old line: toughen up, get in line, and don't ask questions. And if anyone dares defy it, boom, they're off to the gulag, or whatever the modern equivalent is. Now here's the real kicker. The Spartan obsession with obedience and order is practically worshipped in certain circles. Ever wonder why military schools are still revered? Why Spartan-like leadership gets thrown around as the gold standard for CEOs and government leaders? Because let's face it, many of them still love the Spartan way: ruthless, efficient, and unquestioning. They want to inspire their teams the way Sparta inspired its citizens, with fear. That's the DNA of authoritarianism. Create the perfect machine, and anyone who breaks down gets, well, dealt with. The whole sacrifice for the greater good thing is like a glorified version of what Spartans did to their slaves. Only difference, now it's in the boardroom. And let's not forget the cultural impact. Every time Hollywood decides to show a no-nonsense boss or a drill sergeant yelling at a recruit, guess what they're channeling? Spartan vibes. The no-frills, tough-as-nails leadership, the one that breaks down individuals to build them back up, or more often, breaks them. The one that values obedience over creativity, fear over freedom. It's still around today. It's a cult of toughness where emotion, softness, or compassion are seen as weaknesses. It's Sparta's legacy wrapped in a shiny new package. And then there's the militarized economy. You think Sparta's economy was based solely on military prowess? Well, not quite. Remember those helots? The Spartans thrived because they had a massive class of enslaved workers doing the dirty work while the elite trained to fight. Sound familiar? Yeah, fast forward to modern-day wage slavery, low-wage workers in factories, or the underpaid armies of service workers who make life easier for the rich. You know the drill. Militaristic efficiency isn't just about soldiers, it's about getting everyone to play their part in a system that's set up to benefit the few. The Spartans knew that. So does the modern world. Still bleeding from it. Still paying for it. Oh, and if you think that's wild, wait till you hear what happened behind the scenes. All right, you ready for this? No? Too bad. Let's get into the truly bizarre stuff about the Spartans, because if you thought their war-hungry reputation was the wildest thing, wait till you hear what they were really up to when they weren't running around in armor. Let's talk black broth. Oh yeah, it's exactly what it sounds like. This wasn't some gourmet, Instagrammable dish. No, the Spartans literally ate this sludgy, vile concoction made from boiled pork, blood, salt, and vinegar. Delicious, right? Now imagine this. They prided themselves on it. You ever get that awkward, I don't know how to cook, but I'm definitely going to pretend I do vibe when you serve something that looks questionable? Well, this was Sparta's version. Here, have some black broth. It tastes like regret, but it builds character. Honestly, this isn't even cooking. It's like someone had a stroke of genius during a particularly grim hangover and thought, yeah, let's serve this up to our kids and call it training for battle. This wasn't about enjoying life. It was about suffering for the greater good. Who needs a good meal when you're toughening up for war, eh? But here's the kicker. The broth was so disgusting, it became a symbol of Spartan toughness. Like, if you could stomach that, you were worthy of being a warrior. It was basically the 5th century equivalent of sitting through a marathon of The Bachelor and pretending to enjoy it just so you can say you're mentally tough. Ridiculous. But hey, that's Sparta for you. Now, brace yourself for the real twist. Spartan women. Bet you didn't see that coming. While the rest of Greece had women locked up at home weaving tapestries and churning out little philosophers, Spartan women were out here running the show. Not running literally, though. They did that too. Spartan women were expected to stay in peak physical condition, not just to be fit and healthy, but to make sure they produced strong offspring. We're talking about women who could run, wrestle, and even outdance many of the men in their society. Like, outdance them. Imagine some Spartan woman rocking the dance floor while her tough husband stood there, totally outshone, sipping on his black broth. Just humiliating. But wait, there's more. Spartan women could actually own property. This was huge in ancient Greece, where women were usually about as free as a pet hamster. But Spartan women? They had power, holding the keys to the family fortune, while their husbands were off training to be warrior poets or whatever. You thought your mom was tough? I'm pretty sure she'd give a Spartan woman a run for her money. And don't get me started on the Spartan version of tough love. If a woman's husband was too much of a softie, she'd straight up shame him in front of his friends. Sparta was basically the ancient world's original feminist society, except it was entirely focused on producing the ultimate warrior babies. Who knew, right? And speaking of warrior babies, here's the final, jaw-dropping fact that's going to make your head spin. The Spartans didn't raise kids the way normal societies do. Their parenting was basically military boot camp. The agoge, remember that nightmare of an educational system? It wasn't just about fighting, it was about survival. If a baby was seen as weak or sickly, off to the wilderness it went, to die. Harsh? You bet. But that's Spartan parenting for you, tough love, with a dash of if you can't hack it, you're out. So, no, they weren't the warm, fuzzy family types. It was more suck it up or suck it down. And that brings us to the real kicker. Imagine the world we live in now. It's not all black broth and military boot camps, but you know what? There's a hell of a lot of Spartan-inspired toughness still hanging around. So the next time someone starts talking about discipline, power, or building the perfect society, just remember, the Spartans didn't get there by making things easy. They built their empire on fear, strength, and a whole lot of blood, sweat, and vinegar. All right, let's step back for a second. Zoom out. You see it now, don't you? The Spartan way of life wasn't just some be tough, win wars pep talk. They built their entire culture on fear, control, and relentless sacrifice. They didn't just want to be the best warriors, they had to be the best. They didn't get there by chilling out and sipping on a cup of chamomile tea. No, they were too busy throwing their kids into the wilderness, eating blood soup, and shaming their men in public. So what's the takeaway here, huh? The Spartans built an empire on pure, cold, unflinching power. And guess what? Some people still love that idea. Authoritarian regimes, power-hungry corporates, military dictatorships, they all look at Sparta and think, they had the right idea. And the worst part, it works. There's something undeniably seductive about the Spartan way of life. The discipline, the control, the idea that you could, in theory, impose order by just forcing everyone into line. Kind of like those bosses who can barely lead a team without saying, just be more Spartan. But here's the dark part of this whole mess. We're still living with the fallout. Those power structures, those Spartan ideals, they're all over the place. Ever wonder why the world seems obsessed with military power and tough leadership? Yeah, it's not a coincidence. From North Korea to Silicon Valley, that cold efficiency still echoes, and not in a good way. What's that saying? History doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. So next time someone brings up Spartan discipline, don't be fooled. They didn't get there by being nice. They got there by treating everyone else like crap. And that, my friend, is something we might need to take a good long look at before it all starts sounding a little too, familiar. So yeah, sleep tight. History's still out here, biting people.